The red wine dripped from Danielle's black silk dress onto the white marble floor of the dining room. 20 pairs of eyes stared in stunned silence as Greg's hand trembled, still holding the empty crystal glass. The expensive Bordeaux had splashed across her chest, her face, even her hair. But what shocked everyone most wasn't the wine or Greg's outburst. It was Danielle's reaction. She smiled. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic one. A genuine, almost peaceful smile that seemed to light up her beautiful brown face despite the red stains spreading across her dress. She stood slowly, gracefully, as if nothing had happened. As if her husband of 12 years hadn't just humiliated her in front of his entire family on Christmas Day. Danielle, Greg started, his face going pale as he realized what he'd done. She held up one perfectly manicured hand, still smiling. It's fine, Greg. Really? Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. She picked up her napkin and began dabbing at the wine with deliberate, unhurried movements. Greg's mother, Patricia, gasped from across the table. Gregory, what on earth? She ruined everything. Greg shouted, his face now red with anger and wine. She always ruins everything. Always has to make some smart comment, always has to. Greg. Danielle's voice cut through his rant like a blade. Still smiling. Still calm. Stop. And he did. Something in her tone, in her eyes, made him stop mid-sentence. The silence stretched on. Greg's father cleared his throat. His sister Beth looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. The children, Greg's nephews, stared wide-eyed at their uncle and the strange lady covered in wine who kept smiling. All Danielle had done was mention that the turkey was a little dry. A simple observation. Nothing more. But Greg had exploded as if she'd insulted his mother, his career, his entire existence. I think I'll go change, Danielle said pleasantly, as if discussing the weather. She folded her napkin neatly and placed it beside her plate. Please everyone continue with dinner. Don't let this lovely meal go to waste. She walked around the table, her heels clicking softly on the marble. When she passed Greg's chair, she paused and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. He flinched. Thank you, darling, she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. This makes everything so much easier. Greg looked up at her, confusion replacing anger in his eyes. But she was already walking away, still smiling, wine still dripping from her hair. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and sent a quick text. It's done. You did exactly what we expected. See you tomorrow. Then she deleted the message and slipped the phone back into her small purse. Upstairs in the guest bathroom, Danielle looked at herself in the mirror. The wine had stained her dress beyond repair, but she'd never liked it anyway. Greg had bought it for her, insisting she wear it tonight. Said it made her look appropriate for his family. She laughed softly, a sound that would have chilled Greg if he'd heard it. Appropriate. After 12 years of being appropriate, of swallowing her words, of letting him control every aspect of her life, she was finally free to be inappropriate. She cleaned her face and neck with a damp towel, then ran her fingers through her wine-soaked hair. In her purse, beneath her phone, were copies of documents Greg didn't know existed. Bank statements. Email printouts. Photos. A flash drive containing 12 years' worth of carefully documented evidence. And most importantly, a signed publishing contract dated 3 months ago. She reapplied her lipstick a bold red that Greg hated and smiled at her reflection one last time. Then she walked back downstairs to collect her coat. The family was still sitting in awkward silence when she returned to the dining room. Greg looked up hopefully, maybe thinking she was coming back to apologize, to make everything normal again. Instead, she went to the closet and pulled out her winter coat. Danielle, where are you going? Patricia asked, her voice tight with concern. Home, Danielle replied, buttoning her coat over the stained dress. I have some things to take care of. But it's Christmas, Greg said weakly. We haven't opened presents yet. Danielle turned to look at him one last time. He looked smaller somehow, sitting there surrounded by his family's disappointed faces. For a moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I already got my present, she said. It was perfect timing actually. Thank you all for a lovely evening. She walked to the front door, her heels echoing in the quiet house. Behind her, she could hear Greg's family starting to whisper, probably about her strange behavior, about what Greg had done, about what it all meant. They would understand soon enough. As she stepped out into the cold December night, snowflakes began to fall. Danielle tilted her face up to the sky, letting them melt on her cheeks and mix with the last traces of wine in her hair. Tomorrow, Greg would find the envelope that had been sitting in their mailbox since this morning. Tomorrow, he would discover that his wife of 12 years had been planning this moment for months. Tomorrow his perfect world would begin to crumble. But tonight Danielle was free. And she had never felt more beautiful. 3 months earlier, Danielle had sat in the parking lot of her therapist's office, staring at her phone. The email she'd been waiting for had finally arrived, and her hands were shaking as she read it. Ms. Richardson, we would be delighted to offer you a publishing contract for your memoir, Behind Closed Doors, Surviving Emotional Abuse in High Society. The advance offered is $250,000, with additional payments upon completion and publication. She had to read it 3 times before it sank in. After 2 years of secret writing sessions, of documenting every cruel word, every controlling gesture, every moment of manipulation, someone actually wanted to publish her story. Dr. Rivers found her crying in the waiting room 20 minutes later. Happy tears, I hope? The older woman asked gently, settling into the chair across from Danielle. I got it, Danielle whispered, holding up her phone. The book deal. They want my story. Dr. Rivers smiled, the same knowing smile she'd worn when Danielle first walked into her office 3 years ago, broken and convinced she was losing her mind. Back then, Greg had convinced her that her feelings were wrong, that she was too sensitive, that she was lucky he put up with her at all. It had taken 2 years of therapy to understand that she wasn't crazy. She was being systematically destroyed by someone who claimed to love her. How does it feel? Dr. Rivers asked. Terrifying, Danielle admitted. And amazing. And terrifying again. They'd spent that session planning. Not just the emotional aspects of leaving Greg, but the practical ones too. Dr. Rivers had connections, lawyers who specialized in high-profile divorces, financial advisors who knew how to hide assets legally, even a private investigator who could document Greg's affairs. Because there had been affairs. Plural. Danielle had suspected for years, but she'd never had proof until she hired someone to find it. The first was with his secretary, Rebecca. Classic, predictable, ongoing for 8 months. The second was with a client, someone Greg had met at a business dinner. That one had lasted only a few weeks, but it had involved expensive gifts and romantic getaways that Greg had hidden from Danielle by claiming they were business trips. There were others too. Brief encounters that meant nothing to Greg but everything to a divorce lawyer building a case. Danielle had felt sick when she first saw the photos. Not because she loved Greg, she'd stopped loving him years ago, but because she'd wasted so much of her life on someone who respected her so little. But that sickness had quickly turned into something else. Determination. She'd opened her own bank account that week, slowly transferring small amounts from their joint savings. Nothing Greg would notice, but enough to give her options. She'd also started copying important documents, their tax returns, investment statements, property deeds. Everything her lawyer would need to ensure she got what she deserved in the divorce. The memoir had been her therapist's idea initially. Write it down, Dr. Rivers had said. All of it. Every incident, every cruel comment, every time he made you doubt yourself. You don't have to publish it. Just write it. But as the pages piled up, as the patterns became clear even to Danielle herself, she realized other women needed to read this. Women who thought they were crazy, who believed their partners when they were told they were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. Women like her best friend Zoe, who had watched Danielle disappear into her marriage and hadn't known how to help. Zoe had been the first person Danielle told about the book deal, calling her from the parking lot after her therapy session. Oh my God, Danny. Zoe had screamed so loudly that Danielle had to hold the phone away from her ear. I can't believe you did it. I mean, I can believe it because you're amazing, but still. Zoe had been Danielle's lifeline during the darkest years of her marriage. She was the only person who knew about the therapy, the only one who saw through Greg's charming public persona to the controlling man underneath. What's the timeline? Zoe had asked, her voice becoming serious. They want the final draft in 6 months. But I need to leave him first. I can't finish writing about surviving emotional abuse while I'm still living it. What do you need me to do? That was Zoe. No questions about whether Danielle was sure, no suggestions to try marriage counseling again, no reminders about how good Greg looked on paper. Just immediate, unconditional support. I need a place to stay when I leave. And I need someone to be there when he finds out about the book. Done and done. My guest room is yours for as long as you need it. The plan had taken months to put together. Danielle had to be careful, methodical. Greg was smart and well-connected. If he suspected what she was planning, he could make things very difficult for her. But she had one advantage he didn't know about. She was smarter than he'd ever given her credit for. While he'd spent 12 years underestimating her, dismissing her opinions, treating her like an accessory to his life, she'd been watching. learning, planning. The wine incident had been the final piece she'd needed. She'd known Greg would eventually lose control in public. His temper had been getting worse over the past year, and she'd been subtly pushing his buttons, waiting for the right moment. Christmas dinner with his family had been perfect. Witnesses he couldn't intimidate or buy off. His own mother had seen him pour wine on his wife for making a simple comment about dinner. Now, as she sat in her car outside his family's house, still smiling despite the wine stains, Danielle felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Power. Greg had no idea what was coming for him. But he was about to learn that the woman he tried to break was actually unbreakable. And she was just getting started. New Year's Day arrived gray and cold, with the kind of biting wind that made people want to stay inside. Greg had been nursing a hangover and a wounded ego since Christmas, alternating between anger and confusion about Danielle's strange behavior. She hadn't come home that night. Hadn't answered his calls or texts. For 6 days, he'd been living alone in their pristine house, telling himself she was just being dramatic and would come crawling back once she realized how foolish she was being. When the doorbell rang at 10 a.m., Greg assumed it was Danielle, finally ready to apologize. He was already preparing his speech about forgiveness and second chances as he opened the door. Instead, he found a process server holding a thick manila envelope. Gregory Richardson? Yes. You've been served. Greg stared at the envelope like it might explode. His name was written across the front in official-looking letters, along with words that made his stomach drop. Petition for dissolution of marriage. There must be some mistake, he said weakly, but the process server was already walking away. Inside the house, Greg's hands shook as he tore open the envelope. Page after page of legal documents spilled out onto his kitchen counter. Words jumped out at him: irreconcilable differences, division of assets, spousal support, emotional cruelty. At the bottom of the petition, Danielle's signature looked confident and decisive. Nothing like the hesitant woman who had apologized for everything, who had second-guessed every opinion, who had spent 12 years trying to be the perfect wife. Greg sank into a chair, his hangover forgotten. This couldn't be real. Danielle didn't have the backbone for divorce. She'd never even argued with him properly, much less hired a lawyer and filed papers. But there it was, in black and white. She wanted half of everything they owned, including the house, the vacation home in the Hamptons, and his business investments. She was asking for alimony. She was citing specific instances of emotional abuse. His phone was in his hand before he realized he was calling her. You've reached Danielle. I'm not available right now, but please leave a message. Danielle, what the hell is this? You can't be serious. Call me back right now. We need to talk about this. He called 6 more times, each message getting more desperate. By noon, he was calling her sister Michelle, who had been politely tolerating Greg for years but had never particularly liked him. Is Danielle there? He asked without preamble when Michelle answered. Happy New Year to you too, Greg. I need to talk to my wife. Your wife is exactly where she needs to be, Michelle said coolly. And she doesn't want to talk to you. She can't just leave. She can't just file for divorce without even trying to work things out. Michelle's laugh was sharp. Can't she? Seems like she already did. I want to talk to her. Put her on the phone. No. Greg was stunned. Michelle had never spoken to him like that before. None of Danielle's family had ever stood up to him directly. Look, I know she's upset about Christmas, but she's being ridiculous. I was drunk, I made a mistake. That doesn't mean our marriage is over. Greg, Michelle said, her voice suddenly very serious, my sister spent 12 years walking on eggshells around you. 12 years of you controlling what she wore, what she said, who she talked to. 12 years of you making her feel like she was crazy for having feelings. That's not. I watched you isolate her from her friends. I watched you undermine her confidence every chance you got. I watched you turn her into a shadow of the woman she used to be. Greg felt like he was in some alternate universe. Michelle, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. And so does she, finally. Don't call here again. The line went dead. Greg stared at his phone, his mind reeling. This wasn't the family he knew. These people had always been polite to him, had always treated him with respect. Danielle's parents had liked him. Her siblings had welcomed him. Or had they just been tolerating him for Danielle's sake? He called his own mother next. Greg, honey, I was hoping you'd call, Patricia said. Your father and I have been talking about Christmas dinner, and we think you need to get some help. Help? Mom, Danielle left me. She filed for divorce. I'm the one who needs support right now. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Greg, his mother said finally, what you did to that girl at dinner was awful. In front of the whole family, in front of the children. I've never seen anything like it. She provoked me. She said the turkey was dry. That's not provocation, that's conversation. Greg felt the world tilting around him. His own mother was taking Danielle's side? I've been thinking about it all week, Patricia continued. About some of the things I've seen over the years. The way you talk to her, the way you dismiss everything she says. I thought it was just your personality, but after Christmas. After Christmas what? After Christmas, I realized I've been watching you emotionally abuse your wife for 12 years, and I did nothing to stop it. The words hit Greg like a physical blow. That's not I never. Get help, Greg. Real help. Before you lose everything that matters. She hung up, leaving Greg alone in his pristine house with the divorce papers scattered across his kitchen counter. For the first time since Christmas, Greg looked around his home and really saw it. Everything was exactly the way he wanted it. The furniture he'd chosen. The art he'd selected. The color scheme he'd approved. Where was Danielle in any of it? Where were her choices, her preferences, her personality? He couldn't find a single trace of his wife's individuality anywhere in the house they'd shared for 8 years. The realization should have been devastating. Instead, Greg felt a surge of anger. If Danielle had wanted something different, she should have said so. She should have fought for what she wanted instead of being so passive all the time. This was her fault for not speaking up. Her fault for being so agreeable. Her fault for making him think everything was fine when apparently it wasn't. He crumpled up the divorce papers and threw them across the room. Then he called his lawyer. Danielle might think she was being clever, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Greg Richardson didn't lose. Not in business, not in life, and certainly not to a wife who thought she could just walk away from 12 years of marriage. She wanted a fight? Fine. He'd give her one. But as he dialed his lawyer's number, Greg couldn't shake the memory of Danielle's smile as wine dripped from her hair. There had been something in her eyes that night. Something he'd never seen before. Something that looked almost like victory. Danielle sat in the gleaming conference room of Morrison & Associates Publishing, trying not to let her nervousness show. Across the massive mahogany table sat 4 executives, including the editor-in-chief, Helena Morrison herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had built her reputation on publishing books that changed conversations. Your manuscript is remarkable, Ms. Richardson, Helena said, leaning forward with genuine interest. The way you've documented the subtle patterns of emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the gradual erosion of self-worth, it's devastating and brilliant. Danielle felt a flush of pride. After 12 years of having her intelligence questioned and her insights dismissed, hearing these words from one of the most respected publishers in New York felt like vindication. What makes your story particularly powerful, continued James Chin, the marketing director, is your background. You're educated, successful in your own right before marriage, from a good family. This destroys the myth that abuse only happens to certain types of women. That's exactly why I wrote it, Danielle said, finding her voice. I want women to understand that it can happen to anyone. That intelligence and education don't protect you from manipulation. The memoir market is competitive, added Rebecca Santos, the publicity director, but your story has everything. High society setting, dramatic revelation, clear villain, triumphant survivor. With the right marketing push, this could be huge. Helena nodded. We're prepared to offer significant marketing support. Book tours, media appearances, social media campaigns. But I have to ask, are you prepared for the scrutiny? For your husband to potentially retaliate? Danielle thought about Greg's increasingly frantic phone calls, his lawyer's threatening letters, his attempts to turn their mutual friends against her. He's already retaliating, she said calmly. But I'm not afraid of him anymore. That afternoon, Danielle met Zoe at a small cafe downtown to celebrate signing the expanded contract. I still can't believe you did this, Zoe said, raising her coffee cup in a toast. 3 years ago, you couldn't even choose what to order at a restaurant without asking Greg's opinion first. I know. Sometimes I can't believe it either. Danielle smiled, remembering those early therapy sessions where she cried about feeling like she was losing her mind. Dr. Rivers says it's common. The abuser convinces you that you can't trust your own judgment, so you stop making any decisions at all. How do you feel about the publicity stuff? The interviews. Danielle considered this. The old Danielle would have been terrified at the thought of appearing on television, of having her personal life dissected in public. But the new Danielle, the one who had survived Greg's attempts to destroy her spirit, felt ready for the challenge. Nervous but excited, she admitted. If my story helps even one woman recognize what's happening to her, it'll be worth it. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you've started. This isn't over. Zoe saw her expression change. Greg. His lawyer probably. Greg's too much of a coward to threaten me directly. Danielle deleted the message without responding. They're getting desperate. What Danielle didn't know was that Greg's desperation was about to reach new heights. That evening, Greg sat in his lawyer's office, pacing back and forth while Thomas Brennan tried to explain why the divorce wasn't going the way Greg expected. She's got everything documented, Greg. Emails, text messages, photographs, financial records. She even has recordings. Recordings of what? Conversations. Arguments. Times when you said things that don't look good in a legal context. Greg stopped pacing. She recorded me without my consent? In New York, only one party needs to consent to recording. She was legally allowed to record conversations she was part of. This is insane. I never hit her. I never physically harmed her in any way. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Greg, emotional abuse is taken very seriously by the courts now. Especially when it's this well documented. What about the prenup? The prenup becomes void in cases of abuse. She's going to get half of everything plus alimony, plus her legal fees paid. Greg felt the walls closing in. What about my reputation? My business? Thomas hesitated. There's something else. I heard through channels that she's written a book. A book? A memoir. About your marriage. About the abuse allegations. The room seemed to spin around Greg. A book meant public exposure. It meant everyone knowing their private business. It meant his clients, his business partners, his friends all hearing Danielle's version of their marriage. Can we stop it? If it's all true? No. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. It's not all true. She's exaggerating. Taking things out of context. Thomas looked at him steadily. Greg, I need you to be honest with me. Did you ever call her names? Did you ever tell her she was stupid or crazy or worthless? Greg shifted uncomfortably. Sometimes in arguments, people say things they don't mean. Did you control her finances? Her social life? Her career choices? I was looking out for her. She has poor judgment with money. Her friends were a bad influence. Thomas sighed. Greg, everything you just said supports her case. The court isn't going to see that as protection, it's going to see it as control and manipulation. Greg slumped into a chair, finally understanding the magnitude of what Danielle had done. While he'd been dismissing her as weak and stupid, she'd been gathering evidence. While he'd been treating her like an accessory to his life, she'd been building a case for abuse. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years. And he'd never seen it coming. What are my options? He asked weakly. Settle quickly and quietly. Give her what she's asking for and hope she keeps the book focused on survival and healing rather than revenge. But Greg didn't know Danielle anymore. The woman who had smiled as wine dripped from her hair, who had walked out of his family's house like she was floating on air, he didn't know what she was capable of. And for the first time in his adult life, Gregory Richardson was afraid. The story broke on a slow news Tuesday in February. Someone had leaked details of the divorce filing to Page 6, and by noon, the internet was buzzing with speculation about the high society split between successful businessman Greg Richardson and his mysterious wife who had seemingly vanished after a Christmas dinner incident. Danielle was in her publisher's office when Helena's assistant burst in with a laptop. It's everywhere, the young woman said breathlessly, pulling up website after website. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Everyone's talking about it. Danielle stared at the headlines. Wine and dine disaster. Society wife files for divorce after public humiliation. From riches to rage, the Christmas dinner that ended a marriage. Mystery woman disappears after holiday humiliation. This is good, Helena said, reading over Danielle's shoulder. Better than we could have hoped for. The public is already invested in your story. Look at the comments, the assistant added, scrolling through hundreds of responses. Women are sharing their own stories. They're calling you brave. Danielle felt a chill of both excitement and terror. This was what she'd wanted to start conversations about emotional abuse. But seeing her private pain become public entertainment was overwhelming. Her phone rang. Zoe. Danny, are you seeing this? You're famous. I don't know if I'm ready for this level of attention, Danielle admitted. Are you kidding? Look at what people are saying. You're inspiring women to speak up about their own experiences. This is bigger than just your story now. That afternoon, Danielle received calls from 3 major television networks wanting interviews. Helena advised her to be selective. We want to build anticipation for the book, she explained. One major interview to start, something high profile and respected. I'm thinking Good Morning America or 60 Minutes. Meanwhile, across town, Greg was discovering what it felt like to be on the wrong side of public opinion. His business phone hadn't stopped ringing, but not with new clients. Existing clients were calling to express concern. Partners were asking uncomfortable questions. His secretary, Rebecca, the same Rebecca he'd been having an affair with for 8 months, knocked nervously on his office door. "Mr. Richardson? There are reporters in the lobby. They're asking for comments about the divorce." Greg looked out his window to see news vans parked on the street below. His private nightmare had become a public spectacle. "Get building security to have them removed," he said curtly. "And hold all my calls." But Rebecca didn't move. "There's something else. The reporters, they know about us." Greg's blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "They have photos. Of us together. At the hotel last month." Greg felt his carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. Not only was Danielle exposing their marriage, but now his infidelity was about to become public knowledge too. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "We need to talk. Emergency meeting. 1 hour." At Thomas Brennan's office, Greg learned just how much worse things could get. "The book deal is confirmed," Thomas said without preamble. "Morrison and Associates. They're one of the biggest publishers in the country." "When does it come out?" 6 months. "But that's not the immediate problem. She's agreed to do a television interview." Greg's stomach lurched. "When?" "Next week. Good Morning America. Primetime special." "Can we stop it?" "On what grounds?" "She's not violating any confidentiality agreements. She's not making false statements. She's telling her version of your marriage, which is protected speech." Greg ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd developed over the past month. "This is going to ruin me." "It doesn't have to. If you handle this right, you could come out looking like someone who's learned from his mistakes. Public apology, commitment to therapy, acknowledgement of your problems." "You want me to admit to abusing her on national television?" "I want you to take responsibility before the court of public opinion decides your fate for you." But Greg's pride wouldn't let him consider that option. He'd built his reputation over 20 years of hard work. He wasn't going to let Danielle destroy it with her sob story. That night, he hired his own PR firm. The next morning, articles began appearing with a different spin. Troubled marriage. Friends say both sides share blame. Businessmen's colleagues defend his character. Was Christmas incident an isolated event? Danielle read these articles in her sister's kitchen, feeling a familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. Greg was doing exactly what she'd expected, trying to control the narrative, minimize his behavior, make her seem like an unreliable narrator of her own life. But something was different this time. Instead of the crushing self-doubt she would have felt a year ago, Danielle felt a surge of determination. "Let him try," she said to Michelle, who was reading the articles over her shoulder. "I have 12 years of documentation. He has spin doctors and old boys network loyalty. Are you worried?" Danielle thought about it honestly. "Not worried. Angry. Which is probably a good thing. Anger is going to serve me better than fear right now." Her phone rang. Helena Morrison. "Danielle, I hope you're seeing the counter-narrative that's starting. This is exactly what we expected. It's going to make your interview even more powerful." "How so?" "Because now you're not just a victim telling her story. You're a woman fighting back against a system that protects men like your husband. The interview isn't just about your marriage anymore, it's about every woman who's been silenced or discredited when she tried to speak truth to power." After hanging up, Danielle looked at herself in Michelle's hallway mirror. The woman staring back at her looked strong, determined, unbreakable. Nothing like the frightened, confused woman who had sat in Dr. Rivers' office 3 years ago, convinced she was losing her mind. Greg had spent 12 years trying to make her smaller, weaker, more dependent on his approval. Instead, he'd created someone who had survived his worst and emerged stronger. The interview was in 5 days. Millions of people would watch. And for the first time in her adult life, Danielle Richardson was ready to tell her truth without apology or qualification. Greg had no idea what was coming for him. The Good Morning America studio was brighter and smaller than Danielle had expected. She sat across from Robin Roberts, feeling surprisingly calm despite the cameras and the knowledge that 12 million people would be watching. "You look beautiful," the makeup artist had told her an hour earlier, and Danielle had smiled. She was wearing a simple blue dress, her choice, not Greg's, and her hair was styled in a way that made her feel confident and professional. "We're live in 30 seconds, a producer announced. Danielle took a deep breath and felt centered. This was her moment. "Good morning," Robin Roberts said to the camera. "I'm joined now by Danielle Richardson, whose story of survival has captured national attention. Danielle, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me, Robin. Let's start with Christmas Day. Can you tell us what happened?" Danielle had practiced this moment, but sitting here now, she realized she didn't need to perform or put on a show. She just needed to tell the truth. "My husband poured a glass of wine over my head at his family's Christmas dinner because I mentioned that the turkey was a little dry." She paused, letting that sink in. But that moment wasn't really about the wine or the turkey. It was the culmination of 12 years of psychological manipulation. "That's a serious accusation. Can you explain what you mean?" Emotional abuse is subtle. It doesn't leave bruises that people can see. Instead, it leaves you questioning your own reality. Danielle's voice was steady, clear. "For 12 years, Greg convinced me that my feelings were wrong, my opinions didn't matter, and my judgment couldn't be trusted. Can you give us specific examples?" "He controlled what I wore, telling me my choices were inappropriate or embarrassing. He managed all our finances, giving me an allowance like I was a child. He isolated me from friends, saying they were bad influences or that they didn't really care about me." Robin leaned forward. "When did you realize this was abuse?" "When I started therapy 3 years ago. My therapist helped me understand that what I thought was love was actually control. What I thought was protection was actually imprisonment." "Your husband's representatives have said that you're exaggerating, that every marriage has problems." Danielle smiled the same peaceful smile she'd worn while wine dripped from her hair. "I have recordings, Robin. Emails, text messages, financial records. 12 years of documentation. This isn't he said, she said. This is documented psychological abuse." "You mentioned recordings. Can you tell us what's on them?" "Hours of conversations where Greg calls me stupid, worthless, crazy. Times when he told me I was lucky he put up with me, that no one else would ever want me. Moments when he convinced me that my own memories were wrong." The studio was completely silent except for the hum of cameras. "Why didn't you leave sooner?" "Because abusers are very good at making you believe you can't survive without them. Greg convinced me that I was incompetent, that I needed him to make decisions for me. He made me financially dependent and socially isolated. By the time I recognized what was happening, I felt trapped." "What changed?" "Therapy helped me remember who I was before I met Greg. I started writing down what was happening, documenting the patterns. And I realized that I wasn't just surviving this for myself, I was surviving it so I could help other women recognize these patterns in their own lives." "You've written a book about your experience." "I have. Behind Closed Doors: Surviving Emotional Abuse in High Society. It comes out in 4 months." "What do you hope it accomplishes?" Danielle looked directly into the camera, speaking to the millions of women watching who might see their own lives reflected in her story. "I want women to know that you don't have to be perfect to deserve respect. You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to stay in a marriage that's destroying you just because other people think it looks good from the outside." Her voice grew stronger. "I want them to know that leaving is possible. That you can rebuild your life. That you can go from being someone who apologizes for existing to someone who knows her worth." "Any message for women who might be in similar situations?" "Trust yourself. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Your feelings are valid. Your voice matters. And you are stronger than anyone has told you, including yourself." "What's next for you?" "I'm starting a foundation to help women leave abusive relationships. I want to provide the resources I wish I'd had: legal support, financial planning, safe housing, therapy. No woman should have to stay in an abusive marriage because she can't afford to leave." "And your ex-husband? Any final words?" Danielle paused, choosing her words carefully. "I hope Greg gets the help he needs. But more than that, I hope other women see that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You can choose yourself. You can choose freedom." The interview continued for another 10 minutes, but those words, "you can choose yourself," became the soundbite that played on every news program for the next week. Meanwhile, Greg watched from his office, surrounded by his lawyers and PR team. The confident, controlled woman on the screen bore no resemblance to the broken person he thought he'd left behind. "She's lying," he said weakly, but even as he said it, he knew how it sounded. How he sounded. "The recordings are going to be a problem," Thomas said quietly. "If she has what she says she has." "We need to settle," said the PR consultant. "Cut our losses and move on." But Greg wasn't listening. He was watching Danielle's face on the screen, seeing a strength and clarity he'd never noticed before. Or maybe he had noticed it, and that's why he'd worked so hard to destroy it. Either way, it was too late now. Danielle Richardson had found her voice, and she was never going to be silenced again. The interview ended with Robin Roberts saying, "Danielle's book, Behind Closed Doors, will be available this fall. We'll be right back." In living rooms across America, women reached for their phones to call friends, family members, therapists. They started conversations that had been years in the making. They began to trust their own instincts again. And in a small apartment in Manhattan, Danielle Richardson sat back in her chair and smiled. Not the peaceful smile of Christmas Day, but the brilliant, unashamed smile of someone who had just changed her life forever. The interview aired on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, #YouCanChooseYourself was trending on social media. By Friday, Greg's law firm had received 300 calls from reporters wanting comments. By Monday, 2 of his biggest clients had terminated their contracts. "This is temporary," Greg told himself, pacing his office while Rebecca, who had been avoiding eye contact with him since the affair became public, sorted through the avalanche of messages. But even Greg knew he was lying to himself. The interview had been devastating. Danielle had come across as credible, sympathetic, and strong. She hadn't cried or seemed bitter. She'd simply told her story with the kind of quiet dignity that made viewers trust every word. His phone rang. His mother. "I watched the interview," Patricia said without preamble. "Mom, you have to understand. I've been thinking about what she said. About the patterns. And I realized I've seen you do some of those things." Greg felt his chest tighten. "What are you talking about?" "The way you talked to her at family gatherings. The way you dismissed her opinions. The way you made decisions about both of your lives without consulting her. I was being a good husband. I was taking care of things. Greg, honey, I love you. But what I saw on that interview wasn't a bitter ex-wife making things up. That was a woman telling the truth about what it was like to be married to my son." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I think you need help," Patricia continued gently. "Real help. Not lawyers or PR people. A therapist. Someone who can help you understand how you got to this place." After his mother hung up, Greg sat alone in his office, staring out at the city below. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, he allowed himself to really think about Danielle's words. Had he really called her stupid? Yes, but only when she was being unreasonable. Had he controlled their finances? Yes, but only because she was irresponsible with money. Had he isolated her from friends? Yes, but only because they were bad influences. But as he sat there, making excuse after excuse, Greg began to hear how he sounded. Even to himself. Meanwhile, Danielle was experiencing something she'd never expected. Vindication from strangers. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the interview aired. Messages from women sharing their own stories, thanking her for speaking up, asking for advice. Publishers wanting to discuss follow-up books. Speaking bureaus offering to book her for conferences and events. "I can't keep up with all of this," she told Zoe over lunch at a small cafe in Brooklyn. They'd chosen it specifically because it was unlikely to attract the reporters who had been following Danielle since the interview. "This is what success looks like," Zoe said, scrolling through some of the social media posts about the interview. "Look at this one. Danielle Richardson gave me the courage to leave my emotionally abusive husband after 15 years. I filed for divorce today." Danielle felt tears spring to her eyes. "That's exactly what I hoped for." And this one, "I've been in therapy for 2 years trying to understand if my marriage is abusive or if I'm just too sensitive. After watching that interview, I finally have my answer." There were hundreds of similar messages. Women recognizing themselves in Danielle's story. Women finding the courage to seek help. Women realizing they weren't crazy or too sensitive or too demanding. "The book pre-orders are through the roof," Zoe continued. "Helena called this morning. They're moving up the publication date and printing 5 times as many copies as originally planned." But not all the attention was positive. Greg's supporters had launched their own campaign, questioning Danielle's motives and credibility. "Gold digger seeking revenge," read one headline in a conservative blog. "Bitter wife destroys successful husband with false accusations." Dr. Rivers had warned Danielle that this would happen. "When you speak truth to power," she'd said during their session the day before the interview, "power fights back. But remember, you have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth. And 12 years of documentation to back it up." That documentation was about to become very important. Greg's legal team had decided that the best defense was a good offense. They were preparing to file a defamation suit against Danielle, claiming she had damaged his reputation with false statements. Let them. Thomas Brennan had advised against it, but Greg was past listening to reasonable counsel. His business was failing, his reputation was destroyed, and his own family was questioning his character. He needed to fight back. But Danielle was ready for the fight. "They're going to claim defamation," she told her lawyer, Amanda Foster, during a strategy meeting in Amanda's downtown office. "Good," Amanda replied calmly. "Because defamation requires proving that your statements were false. And we have recordings, emails, financial records, and witness testimony proving they were true." "What about the emotional damage argument? They're saying I'm exaggerating the psychological impact. We have 3 years of therapy records documenting your mental state during the marriage. We have your therapist willing to testify. We have your sister and best friend willing to describe the changes they witnessed in your personality and behavior." Amanda leaned back in her chair, completely confident. "Danielle, if Greg wants to make this a public trial about whether or not he emotionally abused you, he's going to lose. Badly. And it's going to be much more public and much more detailed than anything you said in that interview." That evening, Danielle sat in her temporary apartment, looking out at the city lights. 6 months ago, she'd been a prisoner in a beautiful cage, convinced she was crazy and worthless. Tonight, she was a best-selling author with a foundation in development and a future full of possibilities. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You'll regret destroying our marriage." Danielle read the message twice, then deleted it. She wasn't afraid anymore. Greg's threats felt empty now, like echoes of a power he no longer held over her. She poured herself a glass of wine, good wine she'd chosen herself, and raised it in a toast to the woman she used to be. "Thank you for surviving," she said aloud. "Thank you for being stronger than either of us knew." Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Greg's legal counterattack, more media scrutiny, the pressure of being a public figure in a very personal battle. But tonight, Danielle Richardson was free. And freedom, it turned out, was even sweeter than revenge. Spring arrived in New York with unusual warmth, and Danielle found herself walking through Central Park on a Tuesday morning, marveling at how different the city felt when you weren't afraid to be in it. 3 months had passed since the interview. Greg's defamation lawsuit had collapsed spectacularly when Danielle's legal team released just a small sample of the evidence they had. The recordings were devastating hours of Greg systematically tearing down his wife's self-esteem with such methodical cruelty that even his own lawyers had advised him to drop the suit. "No jury is going to hear those tapes and side with you," Thomas had told him bluntly. "If anything, they're going to wonder why she didn't leave sooner." The settlement had been generous. Danielle got half of everything, plus alimony, plus her legal fees. More importantly, she got a public apology from Greg acknowledging that his behavior had been inappropriate and hurtful. It wasn't an admission of abuse his lawyers had insisted on, vaguer language, but it was something. A crack in his armor of self-righteousness. Now Danielle was building something new. The foundation was officially launched, with offices in Manhattan and initial funding of $2 million, partly from her book Advance, partly from donors who had been inspired by her story. "We're getting 50 calls a day," her assistant Carmen told her as they walked through the foundation's bright, welcoming offices. Women wanting help leaving abusive relationships. Lawyers offering pro bono services. Therapists volunteering their time. Danielle paused at a bulletin board covered with thank you notes from women who had found the courage to leave dangerous situations. Each note represented a life changed, a woman saved. "This is what it was all for," she said softly. Her book had been on the bestseller list for 8 weeks. The success had opened doors she'd never imagined: speaking engagements, television appearances, consulting opportunities with organizations that worked with abuse survivors. But the most unexpected development had been personal. His name was Michael Torres, and she'd met him at a fundraiser for domestic violence awareness. He was a pediatric surgeon, recently divorced himself, with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that never made her feel like she had to perform or prove herself. "I read your book," he'd said when they were introduced. "My ex-wife wasn't abusive, but I recognized some patterns in myself that made me uncomfortable. It made me think about how I communicate, how I handle disagreement." Danielle had been impressed by his honesty. Most people either treated her like a victim to be pitied or a hero to be worshipped. Michael treated her like a person, complex, flawed, interesting. They'd been seeing each other for a month now, taking things slowly. Danielle was still learning how to be in a relationship where she didn't have to walk on eggshells, where disagreement didn't mean disaster, where her opinions were valued. "How does it feel?" Dr. Rivers had asked during their last session, "to be with someone who actually listens when you speak?" "Strange," Danielle had admitted. "Sometimes I catch myself apologizing for having preferences or asking permission for things I should just decide for myself." "That's normal." 12 years of conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. But you're recognizing those patterns, which means you're healing. Not that everything was perfect. Danielle still had moments of panic when someone raised their voice. She still overanalyzed every interaction, looking for signs of manipulation or control. She still struggled with making decisions without second-guessing herself. But those moments were becoming less frequent. And when they happened, she had tools now: therapy techniques, support systems, the knowledge that her instincts were trustworthy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Hope your morning meetings went well. Still on for dinner tonight?" A year ago, that message would have sent Danielle into a spiral of analysis. What did he really mean? Was he testing her availability? Was he annoyed that she had other commitments? Now she simply texted back, "Yes. Looking forward to it. How was surgery today?" Simple. Direct. No hidden meanings or elaborate interpretations required. That afternoon, Danielle received an unexpected call. "Ms. Richardson? This is Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Health and Human Services. We have a proposition for you." The federal government wanted to hire her as a consultant on a task force developing new protocols for recognizing and addressing domestic violence in healthcare settings. "Your book has been influential in policy circles," Jennifer explained. "The way you documented the progression of psychological abuse, the barriers to leaving, it's exactly the kind of real-world insight we need." Danielle accepted immediately. The girl who had once been afraid to voice an opinion about dinner was now being asked to help shape national policy. That evening, over dinner with Michael, she reflected on the surreal nature of her new life. "A year ago, I was afraid to leave my house without Greg's permission," she said. "Tonight, I'm consulting with the federal government on domestic violence policy." Michael reached across the table and took her hand. "You know what I find most impressive about your story?" "What?" "It's not that you survived the abuse. Lots of people survive terrible things. It's that you decided to use your survival to help others. You could have just quietly rebuilt your life. Instead, you made yourself a target to protect other women." Danielle felt tears spring to her eyes. Not tears of sadness or pain, but tears of recognition. Someone saw not just what had been done to her, but what she had chosen to do in response. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me. Not the victim or the survivor or the author. Just me." Michael smiled. "You're pretty easy to see when you're not hiding." Later that night, alone in her apartment, Danielle stood at her window looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Greg was probably trying to rebuild his own life, maybe even learning to be a better person. She hoped so, for his sake and for the sake of anyone who might love him in the future. But her story wasn't about Greg anymore. It wasn't about what he had done to her or what she had survived. It was about what she was building with the strength she discovered in herself. It was about the women she was helping and the policies she was shaping and the life she was choosing every single day. Tomorrow she would wake up and make her own decisions. She would speak her mind without fear. She would trust her instincts and honor her feelings and take up exactly as much space as she needed. She would choose herself. Again and again every day for the rest of her life. And that choice had set her free in ways that no revenge could ever match. The bookstore was packed beyond capacity, with people standing in the aisles and spilling out onto the sidewalk. Danielle sat at a small table facing the crowd, still amazed that all these people had come to hear her speak. Behind Closed Doors had officially launched that morning, and by afternoon it was already #1 on Amazon. Pre-orders had exceeded every expectation, but seeing the actual book in stores, watching people hold it and flip through its pages, felt surreal. "Thank you all for being here," Danielle said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. "2 years ago, I couldn't have imagined standing in front of this many people, much less talking about the most painful parts of my life." She looked out at the faces in the crowd, women mostly, but men too. Young and old, diverse in every way, united by their interest in her story. "This book isn't just about my marriage to an abusive man. It's about how easy it is to lose yourself in someone else's version of who you should be. It's about the small compromises that seem reasonable at first but slowly erode your sense of self." A hand went up in the audience. "What would you say to women who think they might be in emotionally abusive relationships but aren't sure?" "Trust your instincts," Danielle replied immediately. "If you're questioning whether something is normal, it probably isn't. Healthy relationships don't leave you constantly doubting yourself or walking on eggshells." Another hand. "How do you rebuild your self-esteem after years of being told you're worthless?" "Therapy helps enormously. But also start small. Make one decision every day that's entirely yours. Choose what to have for breakfast. Pick what to watch on TV. or something you like. It sounds silly, but reclaiming small choices helps you remember that your preferences matter. What about forgiveness? Have you forgiven your ex-husband? Danielle paused, considering the question carefully. I don't think forgiveness is necessary for healing. I've let go of my anger because holding on to it was hurting me, not him. But forgiveness implies that what he did was okay and it wasn't. I have compassion for the pain that drove his behavior, but I don't excuse it. The questions continued for an hour. When the formal Q&A ended, people lined up to have their books signed. One by one, women approached the table, many of them sharing pieces of their own stories. My husband threw a plate at me last week, whispered a woman in her 40s. I told myself it was because he was stressed at work. Danielle looked up from signing the book. Stress doesn't make people violent. It reveals who they already are. I've been married for 22 years, said another woman. I keep thinking it's too late to leave. It's never too late to choose yourself, Danielle replied. 22 years is a long time, but it's not the rest of your life. Near the end of the line stood a younger woman, maybe in her 20s, holding her book with shaking hands. I bought this for my mom, she said quietly. She's been married to my dad for 30 years. He's never hit her, but... She trailed off, tears forming in her eyes. But you recognize the patterns? Danielle finished gently. The young woman nodded. I grew up watching her apologize for everything, even things that weren't her fault. Watching her ask permission to see her own family. I swore I'd never be like that, but now I'm engaged and I catch myself doing the same things. Danielle stood up and came around the table. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah, the fact that you recognize these patterns means you have power over them. You can choose differently. Your mom's story doesn't have to be your story. After the last book was signed, Danielle's publisher took her to a celebratory dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. Helena Morrison raised her glass in a toast. To Danielle Richardson, who trusted us with her story and trusted women everywhere to recognize themselves in it. As they clinked glasses, Danielle's phone buzzed with notifications. Social media was exploding with posts about the book launch. Hashtag behind closed doors was trending. Women were sharing quotes, recommending the book to friends, and most importantly sharing their own stories. But among all the positive messages was one that made Danielle's blood run cold. Greg had posted on social media for the first time in months. It's disappointing when someone you loved and supported for 12 years chooses to destroy your reputation for profit. But I suppose everyone has to live with their own choices. Some of us choose forgiveness. Others choose revenge. The post was quickly deleted, but not before screenshots spread across the internet. Within hours, the responses were overwhelming, hundreds of people calling him out for victim blaming and manipulation. He's still trying to control the narrative, Danielle told Helena, showing her the screenshots. It's backfiring spectacularly, Helena replied. Look at these responses. People see right through it. She was right. The comments were brutal. This is exactly the kind of manipulation she described in the book. Way to prove her point about emotional abuse. Imagine being this tone-deaf about your own abusive behavior. Danielle felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. Even now, even after everything, Greg couldn't resist trying to make himself the victim. But this time no one was buying it. Her phone rang. Michael. I saw the post, he said without preamble. Are you okay? I'm better than okay, Danielle said, surprised to realize it was true. A year ago that post would have sent me into a panic spiral. I would have wondered if he was right, if I was being vindictive. And now I see it for what it is, the desperate manipulation of someone who lost control of his victim and can't handle it. Want me to come over? Danielle smiled. I'd like that. Later that night, curled up on her couch with Michael, Danielle reflected on the day. The book launch had been everything she'd hoped for and more. But Greg's post had been a reminder that her story wasn't finished yet. As long as there were women trapped in abusive relationships, as long as there were men who believed they had the right to control their partners, as long as society made excuses for emotional violence, her work would continue. But tonight, she was content to have taken one giant step forward. Her story was out in the world now, reaching women who needed to hear it, starting conversations that needed to happen. And Greg's pathetic attempt to undermine her had only proven how necessary those conversations were. Christmas Day 1 year later. Danielle stood in the kitchen of her new apartment, putting the finishing touches on dinner for 8. The space was bright and welcoming, decorated with things she'd chosen herself, colorful artwork, comfortable furniture, plants everywhere. It looked nothing like the sterile perfection of the house she'd shared with Greg. The turkey smells amazing, said Carmen, her foundation assistant who had become a close friend over the past year. And it's definitely not dry. Danielle laughed, remembering last Christmas and the comment that had finally given Greg the excuse he needed to lose control in public. I've gotten better at cooking since I've been making my own decisions about seasoning. The guests arriving for dinner were all people Danielle had met since leaving Greg, women from her survivor support group, colleagues from the foundation, friends like Michael who had entered her life when she was finally ready to let people see who she really was. This is beautiful, said Dr. Rivers, who had arrived early to help with preparations. Look how different you seem compared to our first session. It was true. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space now moved through her own kitchen with confidence and joy. The woman who had once been afraid to voice an opinion now ran a foundation that had helped over 300 women leave abusive relationships in its first year. The doorbell rang and Danielle opened it to find Michael holding a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers. How was your call with your mom? He asked, kissing her cheek. Danielle's relationship with her family had deepened since the divorce. Without Greg's subtle interference, she'd been able to rebuild connections that had been damaged by years of isolation. She's doing well. She said to tell you that you're invited to Easter dinner. I'll take that as a good sign. As the evening progressed, conversation flowed easily around Danielle's dining table. These weren't the stilted, performative dinners of her marriage, where every word was carefully chosen to avoid triggering Greg's anger. This was genuine connection between people who liked and respected each other. I have an announcement, said Lisa, one of the women from the support group. I got the promotion I was interviewing for. They're making me regional manager. The table erupted in cheers and congratulations. Lisa had been trapped in an emotionally abusive marriage for 15 years before finding the courage to leave. Rebuilding her career confidence had been one of her biggest challenges. I couldn't have done it without this group, Lisa continued, tears in her eyes. 6 months ago, I was convinced I was too stupid to handle any real responsibility. Now I'm managing 40 employees. That's the power of truth, Dr. Rivers said. When you stop believing lies about your capabilities, you discover what you're actually capable of. As dessert was being served, Danielle's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her stomach clenched. Anonymous messages still made her nervous, a lingering effect of Greg's harassment during the divorce. But this message was different. Ms. Richardson, my name is Jennifer. I read your book last month and left my abusive husband 3 weeks ago. I'm scared but hopeful. Thank you for showing me it was possible. Danielle showed the message to the table. This is why we do the work, said Carmen. For every Jennifer who finds the courage to choose herself. Later, as guests were saying goodbye, Michael helped Danielle clean up. Have you heard anything about Greg lately? He asked casually. Danielle paused in stacking plates. She'd been expecting this question. People were always curious about her ex-husband's current situation. He moved to California, she said. Started over with a new business. I heard he's in therapy, which is good. I hope he's learning to be better. Do you ever regret it? The publicity, the book, all of it? Danielle considered this seriously. The past year had been overwhelming at times. The media attention, the legal battles, the responsibility of being a public figure in such a personal cause. There had been moments when she'd longed for privacy, for the ability to heal quietly. But then she thought about the hundreds of women who had contacted her, the policy changes her advocacy had influenced, the lives that had been saved because she'd found the courage to speak publicly about her experience. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. The only thing I regret is not leaving sooner. As Michael was getting ready to leave, he pulled a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket. I know we agreed no Christmas gifts this year, he said, looking suddenly nervous. But I saw this and thought of you. Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a key. It's beautiful, Danielle whispered. Read the inscription. She turned the key over and saw tiny words engraved on the back. You hold the key to your own freedom. Tears sprang to Danielle's eyes. Michael. You taught me that, he said, fastening the necklace around her neck. In all the conversations we've had, in watching you build your new life, in seeing how you help other women, you've taught me that no one can save us but ourselves. After Michael left, Danielle stood at her window looking out at the city lights, touching the key pendant at her throat. A year ago she'd been covered in wine, walking out of Greg's family's house with nothing but a secret plan and an unshakable determination to be free. Tonight she was surrounded by people who loved the real her, doing work that mattered, living authentically for the first time in her adult life. Her phone buzzed with one more message, this one from Zoe. Saw the photos from dinner on Instagram. You look radiant. Proud of you, friend. Danielle smiled, thinking about how far she'd traveled from the broken woman who had first walked into Dr. Rivers' office. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every difficult step. She poured herself a glass of wine, the good bottle Michael had brought, opened because she wanted to enjoy it, not because someone else had decided she should, and raised it in a toast to her reflection in the window. To choosing yourself, she said aloud. Every single day. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, just like it had that night a year ago when she'd walked out of her old life and into her new one. But this time the snow felt like a blessing instead of a burden. A fresh start instead of an ending. Danielle Richardson was free. And she was never going back. 2 years later, Danielle received a letter that would have surprised her younger self. It was from Greg, postmarked from Los Angeles, written in his careful handwriting. Danielle, it began, I hope you're well. I've been in therapy for 18 months now, and I'm starting to understand the damage I caused. Not just to you but to myself. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that. I'm writing to tell you that you were right about everything. I was controlling, manipulative, and cruel. I convinced myself I was protecting you, but I was really just protecting my own ego. I'm sorry. I hope your foundation continues to help people the way your courage helped me finally face the truth about myself. Danielle read the letter twice, then filed it away. She felt no anger, no triumph, no sadness. Just a quiet satisfaction that Greg had finally taken responsibility for his actions. Her foundation now operated in 12 states. Her second book, about healing after abuse, was due out in the fall. She and Michael had moved in together, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. But more than any external success, Danielle treasured the internal peace she'd fought so hard to achieve. The ability to trust her own instincts. The knowledge that she was worthy of love and respect. The understanding that she could survive anything because she'd already survived the worst thing she could imagine. She had chosen herself. And in doing so, she'd discovered that herself was worth choosing.